back to our channel to explore the dramatic world of Genoa. We reveal the drama of day 2 as Phyllis discovers and accuses Victor of being behind Matt's disappearance. Is that true? Today is a great day to analyze the latest psychological thrillers unfolding in your favorite daytime drama. Let's dive straight into the complex web of secrets, betrayals, and power struggles that continue to captivate us all. The sudden and inexplicable disappearance of Matt Clark has sent a seismic shockwave through the already fractured psyche of Phyllis Summers. When she first noticed the chilling emptiness of the spaces he usually occupied, a profound sense of dread began to coil tightly within her chest. For Phyllis, a woman whose entire existence has been defined by a relentless series of betrayals and desperate survival tactics, this was not a simple case of a lover walking away. Her hyper-vigilant mind immediately rejected any mundane explanation. She knew Matt, knew the dark gravity that bound him to Genoa City, and knew that his sudden vanishing act bore the distinct, ruthless signature of a forced extraction. The electronic ankle monitor that had once tethered him to Victor Newman's surveillance network was gone, leaving behind a terrifying void that Phyllis's traumatized imagination quickly filled with the most sinister possibilities. Her immediate descent into blinding paranoia was not without historical precedent. Phyllis has spent decades navigating the treacherous waters of the Newman family's orbit, accumulating deep emotional scars that dictate her every reaction. She has been burned, manipulated, and discarded by the Newman machine more times than she can count. Consequently, her mind instantly bypassed any logical alternative and locked onto the only suspects who possessed both the motive and the boundless resources to make a man like Matt Clark vanish. Victor, Nick, and Adam Newman became the immediate targets of her frantic, misdirected rage. In her current state of emotional isolation, having alienated her own children, Matt had become a twisted sanctuary for her. Losing him felt like losing the last tether she had to a world that understood her, fueling a desperate need for retribution against the family she believed was perpetually orchestrating her misery. Driven by a frantic need for answers, Phyllis stormed into the elegant, hushed environment of the Genoa City Athletic Club, her chaotic energy clashing violently with the refined atmosphere. The clinking of crystal glasses faded into white noise as her predatory gaze swept the room, eventually locking onto the solitary, brooding figure of Adam Newman. Adam was nursing a drink at the bar, his mind undoubtedly churning with his own apocalyptic crises. He was currently juggling the explosive secret of Catherine Chancellor's forged will, the devastating fallout of his physical altercation with Chelsea Lawson, and the impending corporate war with Billy Abbott. The absolute last thing Adam needed was to be dragged into the hysterical vortex of Phyllis Summers. Yet, like a heat-seeking missile, Phyllis descended upon him, her posture rigid with accusation and her eyes blazing with a frantic, unyielding demand for the truth. Without a moment of hesitation or regard for the public setting, Phyllis launched into a relentless, aggressive interrogation. She cornered Adam, her voice a low, venomous hiss as she accused the entire Newman family of orchestrating a sophisticated kidnapping plot. She demanded to know exactly what he and his father had done to Matt, laying the blame for the disappearance squarely at their feet. She painted a picture of a grand, sinister conspiracy, insisting that the Newmans were once again using their limitless wealth and power to eliminate anyone who dared to defy their authoritarian rule. Her accusations were wild, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate need to find a tangible enemy to fight. She refused to allow Adam any room to breathe, pressing him for a confession or any microscopic clue that would validate her terrifying theory about Matt's ultimate fate. Adam, however, remained chillingly detached, an impenetrable fortress of icy indifference. He slowly turned to face her, his expression a mask of profound exasperation mixed with a dangerous, underlying tension. He firmly and unequivocally denied any knowledge of Matt Clark's whereabouts. He pointed out the sheer absurdity of her claims, reminding her that he was currently drowning in his own catastrophic problems and had absolutely zero interest in the fate of a low-level criminal. He insisted that if Victor had indeed orchestrated some grand retaliation against Matt, he was entirely out of the loop. Adam's defense was not born of innocence. but of genuine ignorance regarding this specific event, coupled with a deep-seated resentment that Phyllis would assume he was merely a pawn executing his father's dirty work. He systematically dismantled her frantic accusations with a calm, mocking drawl. Recognizing that Phyllis was operating purely on emotion, Adam effortlessly shifted from defense to a brutal psychological offensive. He observed her frantic state, the wild look in her eyes, and the desperate edge to her voice, and he began to psychoanalyze her right there at the bar. He mocked her intense, irrational attachment to Matt Clark, pointing out the dark irony of Phyllis Summers losing her mind over the town's resident psychopath. He questioned her judgment, highlighting Matt's long, documented history of inflicting severe trauma on the residents of Genoa City, including her own loved ones. Adam ruthlessly teased her for developing a bizarre, toxic infatuation with a man who was fundamentally incapable of genuine redemption. He suggested that her desperation to find Matt was a psychological projection of her own dark, unresolved issues and an inherent need to control a monster. The sheer brutality of Adam's mockery struck Phyllis like a physical blow, igniting a defensive rage that burned away any lingering traces of rationality. The humiliation of being psychoanalyzed and ridiculed by a man she despised was intolerable. Deep down, a small, rational part of her recognized that Adam's genuine confusion meant he was likely telling the truth about his own lack of involvement. However, his cruel taunts about her relationship with Matt only solidified her absolute conviction that Victor Newman was the ultimate architect of this nightmare. If Adam was out of the loop, it simply meant Victor was operating at his most secretive and dangerous level. Fueling her fear into a weapon, Phyllis abruptly abandoned the interrogation at the athletic club. She realized that sparring with the outcast son was a waste of precious time. She had to march directly into the belly of the beast and confront the patriarch. The journey to the Newman Ranch was a blur of heightened anxiety and calculated preparation. As Phyllis drove toward the sprawling, heavily guarded estate, her mind raced through decades of bitter history with Victor Newman. She knew exactly what she was walking into. The ranch was not just a home, it was a fortress, a physical manifestation of Victor's absolute need for control and dominance over everyone in his orbit. She prepared herself for his legendary stoicism, his subtle manipulations, and his ability to make even the most formidable opponents feel entirely insignificant. She reminded herself of her own lethal survival instincts, the same instincts that had allowed her to eliminate Jeremy Stark when she was backed into a corner. She was walking into the lion's den, armed with nothing but her blinding paranoia and an unyielding determination to uncover the fate of the man who had become her anchor. Upon breaching the heavy wooden doors of the Newman Ranch, Phyllis immediately sensed the oppressive, suffocating atmosphere that currently gripped the estate. Unbeknownst to her, Victor was already operating at a level of extreme paranoia, secretly surveilling his own wife, Nikki, after discovering her profound betrayal and alliance with Jack Abbott. The air was thick with unspoken threats and hidden agendas. When Phyllis finally stood before Victor, she found him seated behind his imposing desk, looking every bit the ruthless monarch surveying his fractured kingdom. He did not offer a greeting, nor did he show any surprise at her sudden, frantic intrusion. He simply observed her with cold, calculating eyes, waiting for her to unleash the chaotic energy she had brought into his sanctuary. The stark contrast between her frantic desperation and his immovable calm set the stage for a psychological battle of epic proportions. Phyllis unleashed a torrent of accusations, her voice echoing off the high ceilings of Victor's study. She aggressively demanded to know the exact details of what he had done to Matt Clark. She laid out her theory, connecting the missing ankle monitor to Victor's limitless resources and his long-standing vendetta against anyone who dared to cross the Newman family. She accused him of playing God, of casually erasing a human being from existence simply because he found him inconvenient. She expected a denial, a furious counterattack, or perhaps even a subtle threat. Instead, Victor remained entirely stoic, his expression an impenetrable wall of granite. He allowed her to exhaust her frantic energy, watching her unravel with a detached, almost clinical fascination. His silence was not an admission of guilt, but a calculated tactic designed to make her feel the full, crushing weight of her own powerlessness in his domain. When Victor finally chose to speak, he did not offer a direct confession, nor did he provide any tangible details about Matt's current location. Instead, he utilized a terrifyingly subtle form of indirect communication, weaving heavy implications into his measured words. He coldly reminded Phyllis of the fundamental rules of survival in Genoa City, emphasizing that actions invariably have severe, inescapable consequences. He subtly referenced a specific, private agreement he had previously established with Matt, an agreement built on strict compliance and the looming threat of absolute destruction. Victor pointed out that when a known criminal, a man with a documented history of violence and instability, chooses to brazenly break a binding agreement with the Newman family, he must be prepared to face the promised repercussions. He casually mentioned his previous threats of imprisonment, hinting heavily that his warnings were never empty rhetoric. As Victor's cryptic, loaded words hung in the heavy air of the study, a chilling realization began to crystallize within Phyllis's mind. She connected the dots between Victor's subtle hints, the missing ankle monitor, and the absolute silence surrounding Matt's disappearance. Victor was making it abundantly clear that Matt had defied him, broken their fragile, coerced truce, and subsequently triggered Victor's wrath. The realization struck her that Victor had likely executed his threat to the letter, utilizing his vast network of influence to quietly and efficiently cage the rebellious psychopath. He hadn't just eliminated a threat, he had orchestrated a complete erasure, demonstrating the terrifying, omnipotent reach of his power. Phyllis understood that Victor was confirming his involvement without ever uttering a single actionable word, leaving her entirely devoid of proof but burdened with the horrifying certainty of his guilt. Defeated by the sheer, insurmountable wall of Victor's power, Phyllis slowly backed away, the frantic fire in her eyes replaced by a cold, hollow dread. She left the oppressive confines of the Newman ranch, stepping out into the fading light of the afternoon. But the darkness of the encounter clung to her like a shroud. She was now acutely aware that her desperate crusade had yielded a truth far more terrifying than she had anticipated. Matt Clark was gone, swallowed whole by the unforgiving machinery of the Newman Empire, suffering a fate dictated entirely by Victor's ruthless brand of justice. As she stood alone, isolated from her family and stripped of her twisted sanctuary, a profound and chilling question echoed endlessly in her traumatized mind. If Victor Newman could so easily and silently erase a monster like Matt Clark from the face of the earth, what unimaginably dark fate was he currently preparing for the rest of his enemies?